I can feel your shadow all over me, trying to pry it down deep. That's where my feelings lie, where they used to sleep. I can feel your shadow brushing my face, playing with my hair and kissing my cheek. I can still feel you all over me. I can still feel you here. It's like you never left. It's like you whisper in my ear. Shadow all over me, trying to pry it down deep. That's where my feelings lie, where they used to sleep. I can feel your shadow brushing my face, playing with my hair and kissing my cheek. I can still feel you all over me. I can still feel you here. It's like you never left. It's like you whisper in my ear. You're still mine. You're still
Hey there, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural broadcast or inaugural show of Games with Writers. And I just want to set something out there right now, okay? This is less a show and more of a conversation, so don't expect production values, don't expect people who actually know what they're doing, because you're going to be sorely disappointed. And we're just a couple of guys having fun and going forward with the show. What I'd like to do is have conversations with a broad range of writers from across the country and around the world who write in a broad range of genres and are also at different places in their author career, meaning just starting out or somebody who has quite a bit further down the road in their author career, so to speak. Now that we've set expectations suitably low, I want to welcome tonight's first guinea pig guest, S.J. Varengo, affectionately known around here as Scott, because that is indeed his name. Scott, welcome to the show.
You're starting with that guy?
I know, right? I wanted to ease into it, and I not that I wanted to set expectations low for you. What I meant was, let me rephrase this, simply meant that I knew you'd go easy on me. How is it? Did I reframe that properly? Do you feel better?
That was beautiful. My self-esteem is completely restored.
Damn it.
Which, in my case, is like about three ounces, approximately, of self-esteem.
Cool. Well, I want to get started and talk about your writing. A little bit. Now, I know you, so I know what you've been up to, but I want to make sure everybody else is up to speed on. Now, you have been writing for how long, would you say?
Well, what time is it now? Serious writing to the point where things are getting out there and people are seeing it. It's been about 4 years, but I have been writing since I was 10 years old, in one form or another. Usually notes asking people to save me for my family, things like that, held up to the window. Please, someone.
Were they effective?
No. I grew up in the house the whole way.
Was there a certain, do you recall a certain point in your life, about 10 years old, that turned you on to writing? Was there some specific thing you read that was so inspiring that you think, I want to do that?
There absolutely is, and it's actually the book Harriet the Spy.
I remember those.
Yeah. She was just a kid, basically, who wanted to be a writer, but her whole gig was she ran around spying on her friends, and that's what they wrote about. And her friends found out, and there was much drama. But that's the first time I ever had an inkling that someone young could write. I mean, I knew how to write, theoretically, allegedly, but I had never thought about doing it because it was something I wanted to do, as opposed to write the word hamster 500 times or something like that, So, yeah, and I think I was probably right around there, 9, 10, when I read that, and that's kind of when it started.
Well, I guess the question is sort of related, and maybe the answer will be the same, but was there a specific instance where you realized that words were more than just writing hamster a million times on the blackboard or whatever? Was that where you realized that words actually do have power?
Yeah, that was probably high school, and the power was probably like getting girls to talk to me. Because that's what I do. It was stupid. It was teenage stuff, but I would write the girl a poem or show her something that I had written, and this girl that would normally ignore me was now talking to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is black magic. I like this.
Very cool. Well, take us through some of your other writing journey. When did you start writing more like your own books, for example?
The original go round was probably 5th grade. I wrote 2 detective story books that were me and 2 of my friends from whatever it was, 5th or 6th grade. And they were terrible, and I think they were about probably 15 pages each, which to me was, only slightly less than War and Peace. And, that's when I was like, okay, I can find an idea, I can capture that idea, and I can mold that idea, and then I end up with something. And so it was about then. Now, from that point on until I was probably in college, I didn't really do much, long fiction writing. I wrote short stories, wrote a lot of poetry, but it just wasn't on my radar to sit down and write a book,
Yeah.
So that probably started up again when my kids were in high school, and they weren't like constantly needing supervision, and I had a little time to myself. I'm like, well, maybe I'll try this. And it was actually about 2009 when I wrote the first few chapters of Sarah of Quadar in its original format. And then, as if you could have a better message from God that maybe this isn't what you're supposed to be doing, the hard drive it was on fried like 3 days after I wrote it. And, basically I thought it was gone. I figured, well, maybe, I was not that far in, maybe I could do it again, but I was kind of discouraged by that. And so I never really thought about it. And then when we moved from our last home to where we live now, I was going through a bag of thumb drives and plugging them in and seeing if anything was on there that I cared about, and one of them actually had a copy of those first few chapters, and I was like, holy crap, there it is, and I pulled it up and read it, and it ended up being very different from how A Dark Clock starts, but it was all there. The first sentence was, Sarah was the chosen one. And that, if I remember correctly, was like a line that just shot into my head one day when I was doing nothing at all. Just that line, Sarah was the chosen one. And I'm like, well, what the hell does that mean? I don't know anybody named Sarah.
I must find out.
Yeah. But the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, I think I can do something with that. And like I said, that story, which I still think I have the thumb drive somewhere, very different, but it set the stage. And then in 2015, which is when I found it, I was in the right place to start working for real, Yeah.
What do you mean the right place?
I was ready. I had enough organization in my life and in my head that I could think in terms of a big project, and that I have to say, from the day I started typing, I never doubted that I would finish the book.
Okay. Wow.
It was that clear in my head, not every detail of it, but where I wanted it to, go and where I wanted it to end. And, it worked out, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you've continued that series, right?
Yeah, there's actually, well, all right, let's, in total disclosure here, there are originally 2 books.
Right.
And then my publisher, who shall go unnamed, said, hey, did you ever think about reconfiguring that into 3 books? Because, as we always say, 3 books, you have a series.
Right.
And I'm like, actually, believe it or not, it would be mathematically pretty easy because the 2 books are each in 3 sections. So if we took 2 sections from the first, the third, and the first, well, that's all, high algebra. I don't want to lose anybody here, but we were able to convert it into 3 books. And as I've hinted on my readers group a couple of times, a 4th book is actually first draft complete already, and was back in what I guess it was November of 2017 or so, when some guy said, hey, did you ever think about ghostwriting? And I'm like, why? Did someone offer you a gig? But anyway, that's when we started doing the Spyco stuff, and I basically had just taken that manuscript and set it aside and didn't really think anything more about it, because I was getting my head into this totally different mindset, right? For, dragons and wizards to, people getting shot in the back of the head in an alleyway in Paris, Not really the same feel to it when you're sitting at the keyboard.
A little different, yeah.
But the good news is, as I said, that first draft of what would have been the first 2 parts of a 3rd book will now be a complete 4th.
So, okay. So these are, is this what you would call epic fantasy or high fantasy?
I usually go with epic because it sounds a little tiny less snobby than high fantasy. But when
high fantasy.
Yeah, but when I write it somewhere and no one knows it's me saying it, I always say high fantasy. But that's just because it fits that description,
Right.
There are multiple races, there are mythical beasts, there's magic, all the elements are there. And when I started it, I envisioned it being a series of books, so it has that, that lengthy epic quality to it as well.
Mm-hmm. So, as you alluded to, you and I have worked together on a lot of the Spyco. We've co-wrote most of the Spyco ones.
Now, who are you again?
Some random guy called you on Skype. I was like, hey.
Yeah. I think mathematically, 2 of them were you by yourself, and technically the rest were both of us, although our little secret,
Yes.
which is that basically I wrote Assignment Paris.
Right.
As
Yeah,
it
no,
was my audition tape.
Yeah, that was because my original plan was to have just like a network of ghostwriters.
Right.
We're all writing. And then I it turned into more of a close-knit series where one book actually built on the last one, and then I suddenly realized, well, this isn't going to work if you have. My original idea was like 5 different people writing books out of order. It's just no. And then I started to care about the characters more, what happened to them, and
well, that was my evil plan. I hope you realize that. When I was writing Paris, I'm like, oh, there's no way this is going to be a one and done.
Yeah. Well, you had it figured. So we've written those together, and then you have your own like flagship thriller series, The Cleanup Crew. Would you tell us about how that started?
It's a funny story, which pretty much everything is. My wife, Kim, and I were going to Home Depot, and it was raining. And so I dropped her off at the front of the store like any good husband would, and said something, sappy like, oh, the rain will melt you because you're sugar, or something like that. And then I went to park the car. And as I pulled into the parking space, I heard something thump in the trunk. And I knew right away that it was like a can of paint that I had left back there. But anyway, the first thing my head did after that was, or it could be a body. Maybe my wife is killing people and I don't know about it.
You're definitely a writer.
And then I thought, what a great idea. And I didn't do it right away because I had actually had the idea before we started the Spyco stuff. But at that point, it was all just in my head. But everybody I told that scenario to was like, oh, I'd read that. And so, after we had done, I think, 2 or 3 of the Spycos, I said, I think I'm going to sit down and really try and do this. And I did.
Awesome. So that's Beauty of Bucharest.
Beauty of Bucharest was book 1, yep. And that introduces us to Nicole Porter, who is probably, I guess, I've never really nailed it right down, but I'm guessing she's in her probably mid to late 40s at this point, because her husband Dan, who is the head of a software company until very recently had just retired, was about 10 years older than her. And I always pictured Dan about my age, so that would put her 46, 47 anyway. She is Dan's wife. She was a stay-at-home mom from the time her kids were born until they went off to college. She had worked prior to meeting Dan for a company called Cleanup Crew, which she explained to him was one of those companies that did forensic cleanings at crime scenes. Like, if there was a lot of blood or something, they would come in and clean the place up and hopefully be able to rent it again or whatever. But anyway, that's what he thought she did. Turns out that Cleanup Crew is a network of assassins, of which Nicole is the best of the best. And she eventually rises through the ranks and becomes the chief executive, essentially, of the whole organization while remaining an active cleaner, as they're called, and still taking mass missions. And that is what happens at the beginning of The Beauty of Bucharest, the whole Home Depot thing stolen, ripped from the headlines, where he goes back to see if the paint that he thought it was spilling in the trunk of his wife's Lexus, and finds a very dead man instead.
So, and then, so that's book 1, and then book 2 is out and available, is it not?
Book 2 is also available. That's called The Count of Carolina, which is a really tough book for me to even talk about, because the work that I put into it, the content of it, was so difficult for me to work through that it's probably, I don't know how to say this other than it's maybe not my favorite book that I've written, but it's an important book in the series because it allows Nicole to reveal what made her who she is now. And it happens very serendipitously. She ends up going back to the town she grew up in and has to confront all the memories that she had been running away from for the past 30 years or so.
Right. Well, and when you're dealing with like a series, for example, populated by characters you care a lot about, sometimes you do have to dig into those uncomfortable topics that you would rather not deal with. But it's sort of like getting to know a real person in a way. You don't just see the good qualities. If you know them well enough, you find out things that maybe aren't so great about them that make them a well-rounded person.
Absolutely. And, you know, even though it was only the second book of the series, the intensity of the transformation in the relationship between Dan and Nicole was so quickly so intense that it became important for Nicole for him to know, you know, everything. And the fact that they were back in, you know, in Greenville, South Carolina, where she grew up, really triggered a lot for her, obviously, as you could imagine. And if you've read the book, you'll understand why it was such an intense experience for her to be back there.
Right.
And, you know, like you said, it was important for, you know, not for me, but for the character, for Nicole to tell that story.
Sure. Right. So Nicole is the main character. She's a female. You're a male writer. What's the most difficult thing about writing a main character who's the opposite sex?
The most difficult thing is probably to not make it as realistic as I know it to be. You know, I've been married to my wife. It'll be 30 years in April. So I have a little bit of experience in interfacing with the opposite sex. And I think I've learned a little. Of course, you know, I'm a man, and so I will never figure it out. But I've learned a little bit about, you know, how a woman thinks, how she reacts to things, especially the stupid things that we do. And it has been hard for me to keep it what I think is pretty honest to what a woman would think. I haven't had any women yet come up and say, dude, you're nowhere near, you know, where you want to be. So I guess I'm doing okay with it. But it, you know, there are times when I have to think, would a woman actually say that? And
Right.
and usually I say, no, a woman wouldn't, but Nicole would.
Yeah.
You know.
Well,
So
yeah, maybe it comes down to maybe just knowing your character rather than knowing what sex your character is.
right. And you know, I mean, we'll let out a little secret. Craig's read the books, so he knows what's going on. But you know how Nicole is. She's badass,
Right.
you know. And so it's okay for her to say something that's a little off color. I mean, she swears like a truck driver, so and so if I let something, you know, stereotypically male slip through her, it's worked so far. I'll probably blow it at some point, but so far so good.
So you write mostly series. You've got Sarah series,
Yep.
collaborated on the Spyco series, you've got the Cleanup Crew series. When you're writing a series, how do you keep things fresh for your readers? Because, you know, I write in a series and there is that, I wouldn't say a temptation. I think it's just a natural inclination to begin to repeat yourself a little bit after a while. How do you guard against that?
With the Cleanup Crew stuff, part of what makes that a little easier is that I set them in a different city each time.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the whole experience of where it's set. I mean, let me see, have I ever been to any of the places I've written about? I've been near Tijuana, which is the book 3, which we'll get to in a little while. But other than that, I've never been near Bucharest, and I don't even think I've been anywhere near Greenville. I've been in South Carolina, but not Greenville. So everything about these things I learn through, you know, research. And for me, that's a challenge that keeps me on my toes, is to always think, what if someone from this place reads this? You know, are they going to say this guy's full of crap, or are they going to say, oh yeah, I know where he's talking about, you know? So I try to do that, and that and the way that the characters then have to interact with that environment, I think so far has kept it fresh for the reader, and it's definitely kept it fresh for me, so that I'm like, oh, I have to write about her again, you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the important thing. I think once you get exhausted with your own stuff, it's tough to keep them from sensing that. It has a way of seeping into what you're doing. I've noticed that if I'm writing something that I really don't want to do, not only is it more difficult to produce those words,
right,
but it doesn't feel the same to me.
Right, and it's not going to be received the same as it was when you were clicking, you know.
Right, I think readers can tell. They may not know, they can sense it. They may not know what they're sensing, but they can tell it's isn't quite the same as that other thing by that guy that I read.
This smells funny.
Take it away. So it sounds like you are working on another one in that series, though.
Did I make it sound like that?
Well, I picked up something that.
Yes, I am working on the third book, which is going to be called The Terror of Tijuana, and takes place amazingly in Tijuana, Mexico. And my whole focus with this was to just get Nicole operational and focused, and to take the story, you know, that we dealt with in the Count of Carolina and just set it to the side for right now, because a lot of that's obviously going to come back into play. But for this book, it was all about this mission. Now, the mission ends up being a lot more than Nicole thought it was going to be. But the plan for her controller, Darlene, was to get her in, get her a job, get it done, get her home, and let's, you know, get things back to normal. And of course, it doesn't work out that way.
Naturally, you wouldn't have a series, would you? So turning to, I guess, writing as a broader topic, do you find writing to be energizing, draining? How does it affect you emotionally and psychologically?
All of the above. It depends on you know, a lot of things. And there's times when, you know, I mean, I remember one of the Spycos we were working on where we were both sick as dogs. Do you remember that? We were both sick at the same time. Yes. and yet I think we had already posted a date when we were going to release it. So we're like, we actually have to work now, you know. And those times it does not feel energizing, but there are certainly times where it's the most amazing feeling that I've ever felt.
Yeah.
I've told you this story before, and I've told a lot of my friends, when I was writing the first Seraph Quadar, there were times when I would finish a chapter and literally like let out a whoop, you know, in my office, and my wife would be like, did you fall? What's wrong? You know? And it's like, no, it was just really good. And, you know, that to me is probably the best part of doing the whole thing. When you write something that, you know, false modesty aside, you know, is damn good.
Yeah. It
feels really good, you know?
Yeah.
So in those cases, it's absolutely energizing. There, you know, like, I guess the way I usually put it is there's days when it feels like I'm living the dream of my life, and there's days when it feels like I'm going to work.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully you have more of the this is the love of my life days than the work days. But
yeah. And I found that, you know, on the days where it's not easy, the days where it is work, like it feels like work.
Yeah.
Even at the end of it, it's still satisfying having done it. People ask me a lot, thinking, do you enjoy writing? And I'm like, I don't necessarily enjoy the process, but I love having written. Like,
right.
Having written is the best high. I mean, it is an amazing feeling to put something down on paper, even if it's not particularly great. I mean, even if it's something that you know you're probably going to have to edit the shit out later
multiple times, right?
Yeah, it's still having done. It's almost, I think it's like in a writer, and I think in most creative people in their chosen fields, there's like a valve that needs to be opened on a regular basis Otherwise,
Usually
really
every
bad
day to
things
some
will
extent.
happen.
Yep. No, seriously, I know personally, even there are times when I'll go like a week without working on whatever my work in progress is, but there's never a day that goes by when I'm not writing. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, I'm one of these old fashioned guys. I actually have it within reach. I have a paper journal,
Mhm.
and if I'm doing nothing else, I'll pull that out and say, well, I didn't do a damn thing today and put it away, but I wrote something,
Right.
I had to write something down. It's a disease, Craig.
The demons. Yeah. Hey, speaking of that, it kind of leads into another question I wanted to touch on, so I might as well do it now. I know we're talking about creative types, writers in particular. A lot of times they have a reputation as like a bunch of depressed people. Suicide is rampant in the creative community. Do you think, what would be your explanation for that? Like, why does it seem that creative people are more susceptible to mental illness, depression, and that sort of thing?
Craig?
Yeah.
Okay, I lost you for a second there.
I thought that
So
was just a dramatic pause, and I was enjoying it.
I'm going to think about this for a very long
It's
time.
like, I stumped him at last.
All right. So honestly, I have to ask you to repeat the question because it cut
Sure.
out right in the middle.